about 45 feet and removed almost 16,000 5-gallon buckets of dirt. So that's an ongoing project. It's kind of my hobby.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding 40th Anniversary Edition podcast. This is guest host Ian Schwandt. I'm joined today by contractor and longtime Fine Homebuilding contributor John Carroll. You can find the original Fine Homebuilding podcast and the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk podcast at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Today's podcast is a celebration of Fine Homebuilding's 40th anniversary, dedicated to showcasing prominent figures from the magazine's history interviewed by listeners of the podcast. Prior to becoming the estimator and project developer for TDS Custom Construction in Madison, Wisconsin, I spent 20 years in the field as a lead carpenter, and in 2019 began contributing to the magazine. In 1990, our guest John Carroll made his first appearance in the magazine and has made over 30 appearances since. John's Taunton Press books, Measuring, Marking, and Layout, Working Alone, and the Complete Illustrated Guide to Building a House have been very influential to my career and are books that I highly recommend to professionals and DIYers alike. John, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So, John, how does a history major end up becoming a tradesman?
My mother used to ask me that, but I really was a tradesman by the time I declared my major in college. I started in high school. After the 9th grade, I went to work in a machine shop, and 10th grade also in the summer. And then the 11th grade, my father got me and my brothers jobs working as roofers. We spent the summer on nailing shingles down, and by the end of the summer, we could work unsupervised. Then, after my senior year in high school, I was a roofer. I could handle layout and install a shingled roof unsupervised, including all the flashing. I went down to East Carolina University in North Carolina in 1968. And I would come home on the summer and on breaks and roofs. So by the time I declared my major in my junior year, I was a tradesman. And then when I graduated from college, I already had my own business. So I stayed in it, and really enjoyed it. And I think my being a history major and writing papers actually helped when it came time to write magazine articles and books.
That's great. It's a type of process that I think Patrick's found a lot of people followed, the going to college because it was the thing you were expected to do or wanted to do, and developing that business that you ran during off times. And it's interesting because your first article in that issue 90 was about laying out 3-tab shingles. And we went through all the various steps for that. Was that a natural first article for you to write because you had spent all that time roofing?
Actually, it wasn't my first article. My first article appeared in the spring of 90. So I think that's the first one they have on the Fine Homebuilding site. But I had a lot before that. My first article was called, I think, Learning from the Elders, and it appeared in the housing issue, which was a special section. I think they've since dropped it. And I had quite a few between then and that shingle article. So, but that was a natural for me. I had noticed over the years how many roofers who could put shingles on at a blazing speed, we're not good at layout. So that one was also kind of a turning point because the editor really thought highly of it. So, but anyway.
So you're currently in Durham, North Carolina, which is a bustling, up and coming city of its own. But tell us about the other places that you've lived and worked in the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast.
Yeah, as I said, when I was in high school, I installed roofing shingles, and from there, I worked. I was in the Washington D.C. area, so I installed shingles in Maryland, Virginia, and Washington D.C. at that time. And then I went down to North Carolina and eventually stayed through the summers and worked as a roofer. And along the way, I also occasionally one neighbor had a house in West Virginia. I went up there and put a roof on. And in 1980, I stayed in Greenville, North Carolina, until 1980. At that time, my parents had bought a lot in Ocean City, Maryland, and they asked me if I wanted to build their retirement home, which I agreed to do. So I moved up from North Carolina to Maryland at the coast, and I built their house. And in the same period, I did some work in Delaware, which was right across the line. Then, as the '80s progressed, I sort of got into an odyssey of travel for some reason. I had a friend that was in New Jersey, northern New Jersey, and I went up there and did work in New York and New Jersey and Massachusetts on occasion. And I also, in 1987, I moved to New Hampshire. So I worked on houses in New Hampshire. I worked in commercial work up there for a while, and then I went back to residential. And I worked on I built a house in southern Maine and worked on houses in New Jersey and New Hampshire and Massachusetts and Maine at that period. It was a 3-year period. Then I moved back to North Carolina, and I moved here to Durham, and I've been here ever since. There's been a lot of business, and so it's been a good place. I bought a house here, and I've been here for 30 straight years, with a few exceptions. I haven't moved it from here. Occasionally, I've worked elsewhere.
So you've been all over that part of the country. I lived in
basically up and down the eastern seaboard, from South Carolina up to Maine.
Wow. Yeah, I started my career here in Wisconsin and then lived in New York and worked in New York and Connecticut for about 12 or 13 years. And it's really a valuable experience to work in those different areas and work with different people who have different work methods and even call the same thing 2 different words and look at you like you're crazy when you start calling siding clapboards versus bevel siding.
I noticed there's, for technical reasons, for structural reasons, there's a lot of difference between building a house in Maine and building a house in South Carolina. South Carolina, you have to worry a lot about South Carolina and North Carolina. You have to really worry about termites. In Maine, it's not a real big concern. Up there, you have enormous snow loads, so you have to beef up the structure of the roof, and you have to dig your footing quite a bit deeper. Here in North Carolina, if you go get to original ground at 16 inches, you're ready to pour the footing. Up there in Maine, 4 feet down. I don't know what it would be in a place like Minnesota. I can't imagine. But one of the things that does is it means that there are less basements built here, because you only have to go down 16 inches to get to the bottom of the footing. There's also just regionalisms that are kind of funny. For some reason, up in New England, you may have come across this. They feel like they have to strap the ceilings before they install the drywall. I've never seen that anywhere else. They also have they love lead flashing, which I've never seen that anywhere else. So there are regional differences and regional different ways of calling things and things like that.
Yeah, I remember the first time I went to Northeast Lumber, and my boss told me get a big roll of lead, and I'm like, a roll of lead for you can buy
Yeah,
lead.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, out here everything is copper or aluminum. Copper if you're
Ex-
on a fancy job, and aluminum if you're on a normal one.
yep,
So
yep. Here too.
how did you go from being a roofer to having the skills that you have in masonry and carpentry? Because I think you're known
Uh,
for writing about both of those trades.
yeah, somewhere around 1975. I had by that time I had literally nailed on acres of asphalt shingles, and I had worn out hammers. I have three S-wing hammers that the head of those S-wing hammers are totally smooth. They they came with a waffled head. They're now long since totally smooth. So I was a little bit tired of roofing. I still kind of liked it, but I wanted to build houses. I didn't want to just cover them with shingles. So I made a conscious effort to acquire both carpentry and masonry skills in the mid and late 70s. I went to work for one carpenter for a while. I learned the basics of frame carpentry. What I learned really was framers are the central guy for home construction. Everybody hangs their stuff on their frame or runs their wires and pipes through it rather. And so you're the main guy, and that's why a lot of them become editors and construction company owners and superintendents and so forth. But I also wanted to learn about masonry, and uh, around the same period, I started working with this mason. Uh, it turned out he needed me every bit as I needed him. It was sort of a symbiotic relationship. He was an alcoholic, and he had spent 18 months in the pen for uh, operating a still way back in the swamp. He
Wow.
needed he needed somebody that had a driver's license and a running truck. So he had the skills, and he was a very good bricklayer. He had the skills, and he taught me stuff. And I had the transportation and the youthful energy at the time. So it worked out real well, and I learned. Uh, I wasn't a great bricklayer by the time I stopped working with him, but I had the basics.
What do you think are the similarities between masonry and carpentry, and how does having both of those skills play off of one another?
There's a lot of similarities. I think it brings to mind to me the I read the life day in the life of Ivan Denisovich, and the main character is laying some bricks on in a Russian prison camp, and he thinks to himself, well. This is a lot like carpentry. He said, once you learn your first trade, the next 10 come easy. And I think you do. There's a lot of crossover in trades. Measuring the close measurements, careful cuts, forethought, uh, and so forth. There's a lot of crossover. So once you learn thoroughly one trade, you can add skills. And I think it's a mistake for people to um, just think that they're locked into one skill. Um, but there are differences. In carpentry, it's very easy to cut the wood. You cut it to fit. In bricklaying, you vary the size of the joints so that your units fit. Uh, it's sort of like, and there's crossover too. Things that are very different, but you use the same technique. This past year, I built some arches, and you have to space the bricks exactly in the space of the arch. And it's very much like spacing balusters in a balustrade. It's just the way, same exact thought process. You measure the space. You have to know where it begins and ends. That's where people get a problem. Then you divide it up and you get equally divided increments. You do that in both carpentry and masonry, a little bit more in masonry.
I remember the first
Masonry,
time. I
go ahead.
remember the first time I saw a brick rule, a folding wood
Mm-hmm.
brick rule, and was
Yeah,
I thoroughly confused by all the markings on there
yeah,
and the different colors and kings and
right.
queens and different sized
Uh-huh.
masonry units.
Right. You lay to the masonry units. Another thing that's different is in masonry, you very often start with the top line and measure down. You establish where you want to end up, and you measure down with your brick rule. In carpentry, they usually just start at the bottom and measure up. So it's a little bit different in that respect. Um, in masonry, I believe, is more of a physical skill than carpentry. Carpentry has a lot more uh, layout challenges, but some of the challenges are the same. As I said, I've made staircases out of brick and wood, and the layout is essentially the same. You're usually trying to get around 7-inch riser and 11 or 12-inch tread. So
Do you have one that you prefer doing, or are they just kind of equal
I
parts of what you like to do?
I I like doing both of them a lot. I really, I'm 71 now, and I still love the work that I do. But I'd say just on a day's work, I find it a little more enjoyable laying brick. Usually, it's uh, it's just got a nice rhythm to it, and you can see immediately the progress. But I some carpentry jobs I just thoroughly enjoy. So I would say also that bricklaying uh, and carpentry uh, are complementary skills. My carpentry skills really helped me as a bricklayer, setting up story poles, building forms, things like that, scaffolding. My bricklaying skills come in handy when I'm building something in carpentry. I mean, sometimes I just need a small pour or a small pier or a repair. I do it without thinking about it. Recently, I'm doing some work on my brother's house, and the dryer wasn't working. I rerouted the dryer line, putting a hole through the foundation, then patching around that hole was just a piece of cake. And I know it might be hard for some uh, carpenters to do that.
There is something really satisfying about bricklaying because it makes the day go by and you do end up with a finished product in the end. Whereas, like you said,
Mm-hmm.
with framing, you're putting up the bones of the building, and if you're just a framer, you're never really involved in the finished product. The finished
Mm-hmm.
product, like you
Right.
said, is
Right.
all hung from your work. Um, so how did you make the decision to start writing about trade work? Did you see a void? You said your first article was something about respecting your elders and learning from your elders, which I think is a topic that this podcast touches on a lot. So it's interesting to hear that
Um,
that was one of your first forays into writing.
mhm. Well, when I was, let's see, about 32 when the magazine started, and I was just blown away by the magazine. The quality of the drawings, the expertise of the contributors, and so forth. And I got the magazine. I read every issue from beginning to end, and I had written papers in college and everything, and I knew that I could write. I just didn't know that I had anything worth writing about at that time. So then, several years later, 1989, I did this job. It was when I was up in New Hampshire, and the house was built, I think, in 1860, and everything about it violated what we strive so hard to do. The floors were unlevel. The staircase was not close to passing code. The windows leaked. But the woman that loved that had that house absolutely loved it. And I thought, why does she love this crooked old house with leaky windows? And started just musing about it. And then eventually, uh, I wrote up an article and I sent it to Fine Homebuilding and Country Living magazine. I had no idea about the publishing strategy or anything. And they called me back and they said they liked it. And so it ran, and then, curiously enough, Country Living called me back and they said they wanted to publish it. And I said, well, I've already agreed to publish it in Fine Homebuilding. So they waited until it came out in Fine Homebuilding, and then they published it. So I had great success with this first tentative effort to publish a magazine article. I was 40 years old at the time. I had never published anything before. So then after that, I just continued to send them things, and they continued to publish it. And the first one that's on the index on the magazine is 1994, but I published several things prior to that. So that's how I got into it. I kept publishing.
Is there anything about a specific project when you do it that makes you think, man, I got to write about this and send it to the magazine? You know, you mentioned the shingle article was born of you seeing a lot of people doing it wrong, and you know, the brick arches article that was just in Fine Home Building seemed to me like something that was just too interesting to not write about.
Right. I think that the magazine articles are of two kinds. One are you just the arch article. I doubt that very many readers are going to uh, read that article and think I'm going to build a brick arch. They just might want to know how it works and how you build it. Others are instructive and they can use it. The article about the shingles was 80% of the houses in the United States are covered with asphalt shingles. So that had a direct use for most of the readers. But I don't think others, and in the house, in the architectural issues, you just see things, you want to get ideas, but you're not going to, probably not going to write, actually go attempt to do it. So I don't think I'll ever do a copper roof, for instance. Uh, but I'm curious as to how they're built and put together.
Are there any other articles that jump off your top of your head as ones that you're really proud of, ones that you've had great feedback from somebody else who's read it and maybe built the project you described?
Yeah, I've written two or three articles on roof framing that I've gotten real positive feedback on, and I think that the traditional roof framing system is very confusing. I've tried to simplify it. I think those are uh, I'm I'm pretty proud of, and those are the ones that I'm the most proud of the roof framing and the masonry ones.
Yeah, I use your roof framing technique from measuring, marking, and layout to train apprentices on how to build a
Oh
roof.
well, great.
Uh, it just it seems so much easier to use that triangle with the batten method that you describe in the book, and it's illustrated so well. Uh, the framing square stuff, you know, once you get to a point where you're used to building roofs, makes sense. But the first time you cut
Mm-hmm.
rafters, it's just so much easier to understand it in the
Yeah.
idea of that
Mm-hmm.
triangle. Uh, but But I consider that book, to be one of the seminal works on building a house. And like I said, it's had a major impact on my career. Uh, Early on in my career, I worked for a company that had the unofficial slogan of, if you can't do it alone, you can't do it for us. And one
Uh-huh.
of the guys there introduced me to your writing. But what inspired you to write about trade work from the perspective of working alone?
Um, I had been working alone uh, for a long time at that point. The Working Alone book was my second book. The first one was Measure, Mark, and Layout. But this customer came up to me. I was working. He came home from work and he said, "You know, John, it's fascinating the way you rig up stuff to hold the other end of the board or to measure long distances." And it just that stuck with me. But anyway, after I finished my first book, Measuring, Marking, and Layout, uh, the editors immediately asked me to write another book, and I proposed that just really based on what this offhand remark this guy said, and that was a very easy book to write. I just uh, described about 50. There are 50 different ways of. It's almost always the same way, but it was about 50 different uh, tasks in construction, how I approached them and was able to do them by myself.
Yeah, that book early on helped me figure out how to install crown molding alone, but also how
Mm-hmm.
to
Yeah,
measure it correctly by starting in the center of the room and measuring from each corner into a
right,
line to get the length, and understanding the idea of just using a modified 2x4 to hold up the other end. Uh,
right,
so all those books that teach you how to think about your work, not necessarily do the work, I think is one of the certainly the
mm-hmm.
hallmark of the Working Alone book. Uh, in Measuring, Marking, and Layout, one of the things that I really take a lot away from and have shared with apprentices is the kind of overarching idea that buildings are really just squares and triangles, and
Yeah,
understanding and seeing that relationship, seeing how you go through in that book the idea of building stairs and rafters, kind of using the same types of tools with the triangle cut out of a piece of plywood.
right.
Uh, was that something that you just developed over time, or have you always kind of seen buildings in their basic forms that way?
I I think that I mean I have five brothers, and I think that some people, just like some people, have an ear for music or language. That I always had good visualization skills, and it seemed like I was always the guy that did the layout and so forth. And I think that one of the key things for me is that uh, I simplify as much as possible the layout process. And I just know so many people that make it so complex. And when I wrote that book, that was pretty much the driving factor, is that you can do this if you just step back and simplify it as much as possible. And roof framing is a prime example of that.
In your most recent book, The Illustrated Guide to Building a House, I actually used your method for laying out the site and laying out the footings to build my own
Mm-hmm.
house, which it's still in the rough framing stage of.
Yeah.
But just thinking about things in terms of putting up batter boards and stringing lines, uh, is that stuff that you feel like is getting lost in the trade as we have, fancy lasers and other tools and added layers of complexity?
I think it is. I think batter boards are great. And a lot of people think that they're a wasted step. So it is getting lost, and they rely on the electronics. I I don't that much. I love. Uh, I have a laser that shoots a level line. I really like that for a lot of things, but otherwise I don't use it as much as some other people. I still use an old-fashioned plumb bob uh, if I have somewhere to hang it from, if I'm working in a basement or something like that. So I think that it's good to uh, to know the math and be able to do the math. I've never owned a construction calculator. I have a basic calculator. I think it's a wonderful thing because it does the Pythagorean theorem, which I before they had that I knew how to do it. I don't anymore with a pad and a piece of paper. But when that thing came out, it was the late '70s. I paid $30 for a calculator now that would cost $3, and I thought it was the greatest thing in the world. Uh, the, uh, the first batch of calculators that did the Pythagorean theorem or the square root, and thus gave me the hypotenuse, was fine with me. I've never progressed from that to the construction calculator.
Yeah, when I took my apprenticeship through the Carpenters Union in Milwaukee, we actually weren't
Mm-hmm.
allowed to use them.
Uh-huh.
And I carried that through to guys that worked under me. Uh, I just think that it doesn't tell you the whole story. It tells you the answer,
Right.
but you don't really understand how to apply the answer. And I think that in measuring, marking, and layout, when you talk about
Mm-hmm.
the different lines that you need to make on a rafter to understand how to cut it to length with, subtracting off the ridge board or subtracting off the angle of the hip, that's all lost if you just are punching that into a construction master.
Yes. It's to me, it kind of reminds me of when I was young and we were getting our driver's license. The idea was you learn on a stick shift, and uh, then it's a lot. You can use an automatic or a stick shift. Now, of course, young people learn to drive on an automatic, and you give them a truck or a car with a clutch, and they can't drive it. So,
Yeah, let alone one that's got like a 3 on the tree or something like
yeah,
that instead of even a 5-speed, right?
right.
When I was a laborer in my late teens, the owner of the company had a 3 on the tree truck, and I think only 2 gears worked.
Yeah,
So that was where I learned how to drive a stick shift vehicle. It was
right.
kind of a interesting experience for me being
Hmm.
41. I'm probably about as old as somebody can be and still have, or as young as somebody can be and still have had that type of experience.
Right.
Um, so what projects have you done around your house, and what projects at your house have you written about for Fine Home Building?
The only project that I got an article published in Fine Homebuilding was when I remodeled my bathroom. I put in a glass block window, which is a great way to solve the problem of having a window over your bathtub without having wood there. So I did that, and that's the only one I've done on my house. I'm like so many other editors and construction professionals. I'm like as they say, the cobbler whose kids run around barefooted. I never seem to find time to work on my own house. Uh, Years ago, one of the editors from Fine Home Building was coming down to take a photo shoot and talk about an article we were developing. And I mentioned that to my mother on the phone, and she suggested that I make sure they don't come over to my house because it is Fine Home Building after all. But last year I had enough time to. I had on my eaves were uh, flush with the siding, and I extended out in one section of my house the eave 20 inches, and wow, that made a big difference. I'm going to do the rest of the house in due course if I live long enough.
So you just added an overhang to the, is it a gable
Yes, right.
structure?
Yes.
And
I
then
extended the roof out.
being in North Carolina, is that a brick home?
No, it isn't a brick home. It's a wood frame home, and the wood was coming down like a waterfall over the siding. So, uh, extending out the eave 20 inches, just wonderful. And I look forward to doing the rest of it when I have time. Uh, that's what I've got going on now. Another thing that I've done is um, if you let's see, let me move this just a little bit. You look behind me. There's this block work that used to be the level of dirt in here. I
Wow.
dug out my since it's been going on since 2002. I've been gradually transforming my crawl space into a basement. I've gone back. My my basement is about 34 feet wide and 60 feet long, and I've gone back so far about 45 feet and removed almost 16,000 5-gallon buckets of dirt. So that's an
Wow.
ongoing project. It's kind of my hobby. But anyway, I,
So how do you
go
go
ahead.
about doing that safely with the house sitting on the foundation, uh, you know,
Um,
underpinning and building that block wall?
I I've used two methods. In the first 12 feet, and this is among the first 12 feet, I went under the footing. The footing is actually, you see that block wall behind me, it encases the footing. The dirt was about this level when I did this. Then when I got past that, I did that because the door comes down here, and so I came in 6 feet from the footing and built the equivalent of a retaining wall. And as I've gone back now, this started. I was going down 42 inches or so, but in the back of my basement, it's overhead. I mean, the dirt is over 6 feet deep that I'm removing, so it slowed me down a little bit there. Um, and I shore things up as I'm going. This section where I went under the footing, I did 4 feet at a time. But back there, I just shore things up. In the center of the house, I have to take out the piers, and I shored the main beams up and took out the piers and dug down, then put a new pier in. And so it's been a nice hobby. But and I hope to get it done before I leave the earth. So some people have suggested that I might have myself buried down here. I don't know.
So Andy Engel, who helped me kind of prep for this interview, he might be the guy that you were talking about who was coming down for the glass block one, but he fondly recalled that you had a very custom toothbrush holder in your bathroom, and he wanted me to ask you if you still have that and if you could describe it for everyone.
I still do. I made a little medicine cabinet out of wood, and to hold the toothbrush, I drilled a series of holes to hold the toothbrushes and the uh, razors and so forth. And they're still working. They work really well. But sadly, this was probably 15 years ago that I remodeled my bathroom. I haven't quite completed it yet. I've still got details to finish up. But the toothbrush holder has served me well.
I guess one last thing I'd like to ask you, John, is do you feel a connection through your articles in how you've taught other people the trade, even if it's indirectly through others like myself who've read your books and then passed that along to people who have worked under us. Another Andy quote is he likes to think of all of us as being part of a continuum of knowledge. Interested to hear if that's something that plays in your mind as you're doing this work and writing.
It does. some people have asked me, having studied history in college, why I didn't become a teacher, and I tell them I feel like in a way I am. I when I'm writing an article, I'm a lot of times just explaining it to the reader in the same manner that I would explain it to somebody on site, and so I feel like I'm sort of a teacher in that respect.
Yeah, that's great. I've really enjoyed talking to you, John. Your work has really impacted my career in the trades, and through its impact on me, I believe it's impacted
Well, that's wonderful to
others.
hear. Wonderful to hear. Uh, Very gratifying to hear that, Ian.
Yeah, and then it's one of those things that's really made me want to write. And I started writing at the same age as you said you did. So looking at
Yeah,
your body of work, it gives me some hope that over the next 30 years, maybe I can put together
yeah,
that same type of a body of work and
that'd be
have that
great.
effect on others. So
I think about it. Uh, let's see, 8 years after I published my first article, I published my first book. So keep at it. I mean, if you just keep rolling with it, you might have a book in a few years.
yeah, no, I got to keep that in mind. That would be great. I'm just
Yeah,
looking always for projects to write about at this point.
yeah, yeah.
So I want to thank John for joining me, and I want to thank Fine Homebuilding for giving me this opportunity, and also for keeping craft alive long since before it needed to be a hashtag to maintain its place in the zeitgeist. And thank you to all for listening. And if you're a professional tradesperson, please strive to use your knowledge to be a positive influence in the lives of others, and take time to consider your place within the continuum of knowledge in our trades. And like, comment, or review this podcast wherever you're listening, and send your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com, and happy building.